Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard. Bruce, what's going on, man? How are you?
Just peachy, by God. You know, hey, just another day in the neighborhood. Just, getting up about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, hanging out for about 3 or 4 hours, have some dinner, and then going to bed.
Sure. Well, listen, we appreciate you making time to catch up here on a Sunday. Had to call an audible. Our plan was to crank out Hacksaw Jim Duggan for you guys this past Friday, but duty called. So I jumped into the archive.
You said duty.
Over at adfreeshows.com and put together 3 little bonus pieces of content that we've never aired here on the main feed, including ending the Undertaker streak, the main event of In Your House Final Four from 1997, and of course the main event from WrestleMania 17, Rock Austin. But today we're back on track, man. Hacksaw Jim Duggan. I guess we'll just start at the beginning. When did you first meet Hacksaw?
Man, the first time that I met Duggan was when we were finishing up. It had to be 82, maybe 83, but I think it was 82-ish, when Buck Robley was booking Southwest Championship Wrestling and brought Duggan in as kind of the answer to Bruiser Brody and the anti-Bruiser Brody in many ways. And Duggan was this kind of young, raw talent from New York, came in, and the whole gimmick with him at the beginning was that you would introduce him as, weighing in at 275 pounds from Glens Falls, New York, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. And then he would correct you, go, "That's Duggan, 2 G's. Duggan, Duggan, tough guy." And that was, that would go around the corn, and the whole thing was mispronounce his name so that he could correct you. But I remember, him coming in, and Robley being Robley, they would have a bunch of beer in the locker room and shit like that, which was kind of frowned upon with Paul Bosch. Paul wasn't a drinker, and he didn't like, guys drinking in the dressing room unless it was after the show and or if it was Andre or Harley Race. So, it was weird. And I remember Duggan just being a wild, just kind of a wild, raw talent at the time. And then Brody left. Duggan, I think, went to Atlanta for a fucking cup of coffee. And then next thing you know, he was with Mid-South with Bill Watts. But the thing with Duggan, I'm sure I've told the story before with Frank Brody. We shot this huge angle where Brody was blinded by Duggan and Buck Robley. And when Brody came back for the big rematch for his big return. He had a hair up his ass for whatever reason and didn't want to work. He was mad at Paul. He was mad at Robley, and Robley was managing Brody at the time. So here Duggan is, 2 out of 3 fall match, and it's the big return. Everybody's expecting Brody to come out and kick Duggan's ass, and Brody hits the ring and won't do shit. And Duggan's trying everything under the sun, trying to get Brody to go, and Brody's not selling anything, not doing anything. He's just and finally Buck Robley, who's down there, goes, beat the shit out of him. Just beat the shit out of him. And Duggan is throwing everything at Brody. And Brody wasn't selling it until finally Brody just crossed his arms in the middle of the ring, sat down, crisscross applesauce, laid down, and Duggan covered him 1, 2, 3. Then Brody just sat back up and crossed his arms. And Buck Robley was pleading with Bruiser Brody, come on, please, Frank, we'll settle it later. Just please do something. Paul Bosch was beside himself. He was doing commentary, and even he got off the microphone and was slapping the mat trying to get Brody's attention. But that was early Hacksaw Jim Duggan, but it was really Duggan with 2 G's.
Of course, he's born January 14th, 1954, Glen Falls, New York. And then I guess that's actually not just his kayfabe, but his actual hometown. He's a star athlete there in high school, letters in football, basketball, track, and wrestling. And I think back in like 73, he set a shot put record that may still stand today. When he's a high school senior, he wins the state championship in wrestling in the unlimited weight class, making him the first person ever from Glen Falls to accomplish that. And he actually goes undefeated that year. And the guy he beat for the title goes on to win the Pan Am Games later that year. His dad was the police chief there, and he's recruited to play football by Ohio State, but winds up choosing Southern Methodist University instead. He's voted the team captain there. And when he wraps up his collegiate career, signs with the Falcons in the NFL, but ultimately finds himself released. I think he cites some knee injuries there, and played some Canadian football. And I guess along the way, probably when he's at SMU, he runs into Fritz von Erich, who encourages him to try wrestling one day. But when football finishes up, he decides to call Fritz about getting into pro wrestling and winds up going to the Sportatorium. And I think Gary Hart gave Jim his first pair of trunks, and he's sort of off to the races and learns how to run the ropes and take some bumps right there at the Sportatorium. Did you ever talk to Jim about Fritz helping him out and showing him the ropes and getting him broke in?
You know what? Never, ever did. And I always assumed that he had started somewhere in upstate New York and came down and, went through the Atlanta stuff. And when Robley found him, and then he was doing extra work. He was doing enhancement work for the WWF at the time. And you can go back and on some of those old Superstars of Wrestling or Championship Wrestling, you can find old Jim Duggan.
Yeah,
they're
exactly
doing work.
After he spends a little bit of time in world class, he goes back to New York to visit family. His dad knew Arnold Scollin, so he brings him to join the WWF. And as you said, he winds up working as an enhancement talent for matches against Ken Patera, Sergeant Slaughter, and the like. And I think the office at the time wanted him to come up with something maybe a little more flamboyant than just Big, because that was his name, Big Jim. But they do decide to send him on the road and show him how to learn to wrestle, including they send him to Hawaii to work with Peter Maivia. Of course, we know The Rock's grandfather, and Jim wrestles there as the Convict and wears a mask. And that's where, of course, he would meet a very young Rock once upon a time. And I think he's only making like $30 a week wrestling there. But he does meet a lifelong friend, Haku. And I guess if you're looking for a friend when you're trying to cut your teeth in wrestling, Haku's probably about as good as it's going to get, huh?
Yeah, I would just ride those coattails if I could. If he was making $30 a week, he was probably on top there.
After he leaves Hawaii, as you said, briefly goes to Georgia Championship Wrestling, wrestles Ted DiBiase a few times. And of course, Jim says that taught him a lot, but he doesn't last. Ole Anderson didn't get along with him, but I don't know who Ole got along with now that I think about it. So Jim winds up leaving, goes to Pensacola, and starts working there. While he's in that territory, it's Robert Fuller's, of course. That's where he makes the Bruiser Brody Buck Robley relationship. And he winds up going back to the San Antonio territory, and that's where he becomes Hacksaw Jim Duggan. And he would say that his old pal Brody is the person who told him to start carrying a 2x4 with him, because Jim is a heel, and when you're a heel, you want to walk to and from the ring, obviously. But if you're doing a good job on the way back, things may get a little tough. So if you carry a 2x4, you can use it as a weapon if you need be. And Brody would cite that that's the reason he carries a chain, because when he's a bad guy, he knows he can clear the aisleway. I got to tell you, in my research, that sort of stood out to me. I never assumed that the 2x4 was not sort of a much later creation, and that Brody would have suggested it just to work your way back.
Yeah, it was something for a big man to do, and it was something also to give him a weapon. But, you would be hard pressed, and I can't think of anybody that would ever say a bad word about Duggan. He was just he's one of those guys. He's a super nice human being in general. So guys wanted to help him. Guys, would go out of their way to help him. And even when Jim got a taste of the good life, so to speak, he didn't change. He was still just Jim Duggan. And so I could see, yeah, definitely Brody, and all along the way, people were always trying to help him create and make his character a little bit better and larger than life.
Well, the big break, as you said, does come in Mid-South. In 1982, that's when he moves to Mid-South to work for Bill Watts. And Jim had the same experience everybody does in that territory. He said it was rough. Said he'd wrestle 10 times in a 7-day period. But he did say he learned more about the business there and how to work and how to talk than anywhere else. When he comes in and debuts as a heel, and he's eventually going to become part of the Rat Pack faction, Ted DiBiase, Matt Bourne, and Mr. Olympia. And after Hacksaw Butch Reed debuts in Mid-South, of course, there's an instant feud here about who is the true Hacksaw. And the Rats also feuded with stars like Reed and Magnum and JYD. And a lot of times we would see Duggan interfere in a DiBiase JYD match while wearing a gorilla suit during the Louisiana State Fair, causing JYD to lose a loser leaves town match. And after DiBiase aligned himself with Skandar Akbar, Duggan refused to go along with him and became a face for the first time in his career. Talk to me a little bit about the Rat Pack. This is, we don't know it, but this group of guys is going to go on to be a big set of stars for Vince McMahon one day.
Yeah, they would. And it was kind of, you're coming off of the Freebirds in a 3-man team of Michael Hayes, Buddy Roberts, and Terry Gordy. And the Rat Pack, my recollection, I think Olympia was a part of it for a short time, but it was DiBiase, Matt Bourne, and Duggan.
Right.
It was 3 guys that could interchange, and they had their individual programs, but they also had the tag team program as well. So it was 3 guys, 2 of them especially that could work in Matt Bourne and Ted DiBiase. And then you had Duggan, who was the brawler and, the big bodyguard, for lack of a better term. And it was a place for Duggan to be in a group and learn, because he still was a little rough around the edges. It's still green, but man, he had that charisma out the ass and size and look and everything else that you put him, sticking with DiBiase. DiBiase is going to teach him to work and kind of teach him the ropes, so to speak. So it was a heel faction that had great workers in it, and eventually they all spun out. Matt went his way, and DiBiase and Duggan kind of spun out into the program with each other that lasted seemingly forever. The rest, as I say, is history.
Talk to us about Jim Duggan as a heel. I mean, I'll be honest. I can't imagine ever even seeing that. He's always been USA my whole life. So it's hard for me to imagine bad guy Jim Duggan.
Oh, he's a great heel because he was a big, tough bastard, and he could go out there and fight and brawl with the best of him. So when you have Hacksaw Jim Duggan against Junkyard Dog, Dog was a national institution in Louisiana and in the Mid-South, and Duggan could give him a run for his money as a heel. Duggan was believable that Hacksaw Jim Duggan could do damage to JYD. So people believed it, and he was easy to hate. Big, mean, nasty, not the prettiest guy in the world. And then after JYD left, and you really needed that top babyface to come out of the woodwork, so to speak, and Duggan was right there. Duggan was the man.
No doubt about it to me. I mean, we know what he's capable of with the WWF. And when you go back and you watch his Mid-South stuff, and the first time I saw it was probably, I don't know, maybe 97 when I first started tape trading, and I would hear a lot about his matches with DiBiase, and it's just weird to see these guys sort of pre-WWF gimmick, but it is a different style of wrestling. If we've got maybe some younger fans who aren't familiar with the style of wrestling that Bill Watts enjoyed, could you sort of smarten us up and tell us how the presentation was different from maybe what Vince McMahon put on?
Well, kind of like, and I think that in general, those that worked the Texas territory, Dallas, I want to throw San Antonio in there because they had a little bit different. Theirs was a little more Hispanic based and a little bit more geared towards the luchas, but they were in there. But Bill Watts, Houston, it was a big man territory where you had to be big in stature to get over. And it wasn't someplace, it wasn't a high spot territory. It wasn't a lot of bumps being taken at the time. And it was more of a rough and tough, a stiffer style of wrestling, where so much so that Bill Watts in particular would always point out New York and other territories where it's like, hey, we don't have these mamby-pamby little wrestlers. We have men. We have men wrestling here. And by God, these men hit each other. And it was all about how tough the business was. So the talent worked a lot stiffer, and it was tough to do, to work, 9-10 times a week, especially with that style. But Duggan was able to do it. He's a tough guy. He was able to dish it out, and he was able to take it.
Really, if you've never seen any of his Mid-South work, I can't recommend it enough. The WWE put a DVD out, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years ago, but there's a bunch of stuff on the network now. But now that he's here and he's a newly minted good guy, he's going to win the Mid-South tag team titles with Magnum TA and later win the North American heavyweight title, which is a gargantuan belt. After the Mid-South North American title is retired, when Mid-South becomes the UWF in 86, Duggan would lose to Terry Gordon in a tournament finale to determine the first.
Terry Gordon?
Did I say Terry Gordon?
You did. That's like Michael B.S. Haynes and Buddy Rogers and Terry Boom Boom Gordon.
That's how I know me and you've been hanging out too long, because I think I would have said Michael Haynes right there too. Just
Michael B.S. Haynes.
Yeah, BS.
And he didn't say he wasn't doot. He was boot or coot.
He might have even been tooting too. I don't know.
Oh, there you go, Michael B.S. Toot Baines.
During a match with One Man Gang would ram Jim's head into the ring post, but there's a bolt sticking out of the post. It pretty much goes right into Jim's head. He's still got an indentation in his skull from that. And he's still got to wrestle again later that night against Terry Bam Bam Gordon. And there
he was the cousin of Terry Boom Boom Gordon.
Yeah. Boom, my bad. They're in different dressing rooms. So Terry didn't know how bad Jim was hurt, but they worked the match anyway. And eventually Jim would team up with, Terry Taylor and win the UWF World Tag Team titles for the second time. But then it all starts to come to a head. He's going to lose a loser leaves town match to the One Man Gang, and he leaves the UWF for the WWF. Talk to us a little bit about where Duggan was on the cards when this happened. So I guess as a backstory, maybe you should explain what's the difference between Mid-South and the UWF.
The name, and Vince had the World Wrestling Federation, and what's bigger than the world is the universe. And that was Bill Watts' philosophy of, oh, they were going to have the world and we'll have the universe. And Bill felt that he should compete with WWF since WWF was trying to compete with him. During Duggan's run, Duggan had such a hell of a run in Mid-South and UWF, and he was a top guy. I think his most notable program was with Ted DiBiase. And as I said before, they had worked so many times in so many different matches. Every match, it became a running joke at the office in Houston, because we would get the cards handwritten by Jim Ross, and Jim had to have a description for every fucking match on the card. It was like a special challenge match or a whatever. And DiBiase and Duggan had been through every gimmick match that there was. I mean, everything under the sun. You name it, we'd had it.
Right.
And we would joke when we would wait for the cards to come in and talk about it and go, God damn, what are we going to have this, next week to promote? What is that going to be? Is it going to be fucking possum on a pole thing? And get the card. And this was an actual match that we had. It was a Texas death, loser leave town, coal miner glove on a pole, both men dressed in tuxedos inside of a solid steel cage. Now, I think we might have been in that. I don't know if we had I don't think we had the loser painted yellow in that, but we did have a loser gets painted yellow in there along the way. But we had at least 5 gimmicks. I'm going to go through and find the program so I can put it up there, because it was like the headline trying to promote the match was every gimmick match you could possibly think of in tuxedos in a cage.
Was the
Loser League Town, Texas Death, coal miner's glove on a fucking pole, both men dressed in tuxedos inside of a steel cage, and loser. Like, what the fuck? By the time you get all the stipulations out, you're done in a 2-hour show. And we had that match. That was for Teddy to go to Japan at one point, and it just was. It was insanity, just some of the different things that we did. But that went on, and Duggan was just such a huge fucking draw. The night that you're talking about with One Man Gang, I'm 3 feet from him when Duggan's head went into the post. And there's look, you get potatoed and you react different way with a potato than you do when someone's throwing a working punch or whatever. But Duggan hit that post, man, and there was the thud and the, oh shit. And he just reached up and grabbed his head, and we got him to the back. And when we did, the doctor didn't want to let him go out and work the next match because he still had another match to go. And we didn't want to stitch him up because probably get busted open in the next match as well. Doug was like, fuck it. I'm going out. You couldn't stop him.
Right.
Then from there, they finally got him stitched up, and I don't think that he or the doctor that did the stitching, I don't think they cleaned it up enough, because then it got infected. But Duggan didn't miss any days. He just kept going with this big infected head and this nasty knot, and just every night going out and beating the shit out of each other, being Hacksaw Jim Duggan. So, of course, Watts loved that shit. God damn, yeah, that's good shit. You know, he fucking going out here and working. Yeah, my guys are tough. They're not pussies that take off for a hangnail. This guy got 7,000 stitches in his head. And he fucking sewed it up and went to the next town. And so most people are sitting there going, holy fuck. He shouldn't be up, much less going and having wrestling matches. But that's who Duggan was. And in the middle of all this shit, I remember he got got a tour of Japan. And he was going to go over to Japan, but they were going to fly him from Houston. So his last date was on a Friday night in Houston. Then he was going to leave on a Saturday. And I think it was a 3 or a 4 week tour. And then come back. And Duggan and I were friends, and he asked if he could leave his car in my place. Jim had a real nice Lincoln Continental with like wire rim hubcaps. So I went and met him out at the Sheraton or wherever in Intercontinental Airport, and saw him off to Japan and took his car and took it back to my place. Well, I lived in a townhouse complex, and it was like you had to have a code to get into the complex,
right,
and park. You know, it had a gate around it and all this shit. So I think it's pretty safe, right? I park it down along the back gate and all this shit. And one night I'm home with a buddy of mine, and we were partaking in some fine herbal remedies when I get a knock on the door. And I look through the peephole, and it's a police officer.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. And I'm like, fuck. But the longer I stare at it, I realize I think that's my neighbor. Because he lived at the end of the row of townhouses. And so I like open up the door and I like go right outside. I don't open the door, leave it open, or ask him to come in for obvious reasons. And I just bolt out the door. Hey, man, yeah, what's going on? He says, hey, Bruce, is that your car, man, with the Louisiana plates on it? Because I think I saw you driving it the other day. So no, it's a buddy of mine, and he's in Japan. I told him I would watch his car for a couple of weeks. And he says, he goes, well, I just caught 2 kids trying to steal his hubcaps. I'm like, well, motherfucker. So they had jumped the fence. They'd seen the car there with the hubcaps and shit. And just so happened, cops coming home from work, pulls up on them. They fucking take off. And I go like an idiot, stoned out of my mind, with the cop to go look for the other friend. And we're like driving along, man. We're not even, I bet you we're probably 2 or 3 streets over. And I said, hey, man, we should like drive along the ditch, because the fucker's probably not going to be walking the streets. And he pulls down this little ditch area. And sure enough, man, there's this fucking kid with a paper bag. All right. And he goes, I guarantee you that's him, man. He goes, I bet he's got the hubcaps in the bag. And the other kid that he caught is in the back. And I jump out of the car and take off trying to chase this motherfucker down. Now, I wasn't in the kind of shape I'm in now. I was actually in pretty fucking good shape at the time. But I'm stoned out of my mind. And that's not a good recipe trying to run when your lungs are full of something else. And plus, this kid, he had to be like a fucking sprinter or something, or a long distance runner or something. And he takes off. And I mean, there's a good, there had to be at least, he had 20, 30 yards on me. And gain, like the gap's getting bigger all the way down. Next thing I know, I look up and the fucking cop with the other kid in it had like pulled down in front of us and pulled across, and he gets out, it does nothing. And the fucking kid stops, and I'm just, motherfucker. And when we get there, and I grab the fucking kid and throw him up against the car, and this guy's like, easy, easy. But we got all the hubcaps back, and I had to tell Jim that, hey, your hubcaps got stolen, man. We had a major crime scene in my house. I went in pursuit, and of course, I told Jim about how I chased him down single-handedly and tackled him and got the shit back.
Of course.
But yeah, that was a hell of a fucking night. The whole and when we come pulling back, as he's taking me back, and of course, he's off work, so he just radioed in for for somebody else to come to the apartment complex or the little condos there to take the one kid he had, and then we had both of them, and there's fucking Armando standing out just with my door wide open and just drugs everywhere. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing, man? He goes, man, fuck, I thought they arrested you, man. And I'm like trying to see what was going on. I'm like, no, shit, man. These guys stole the thing. And I'm trying to explain it to him. And the cops want to come inside my place now. And I'm making every excuse in the world trying to just, we'll get out here, man. I gave my statement. And it was just an interesting night. It's just one of those kind of, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not every day you get high and go on a police pursuit.
And jump out of a police car and fucking give chase on foot.
Yeah, I'm going to need Chris McDonald to get to work to recreate that Beastie Boys sabotage. Man. So,
I mean, and the motherfucker was like, I mean, he wasn't even breathing heavy. Oh, fuck, man, this sucks.
Well, Duggan actually makes his way to Vince before you do, right? How do you hear the news that Duggan is going to the World Wrestling Federation?
Actually, I think Jake actually probably told me first. Jake was already up there, but I think Duggan told me because he was going. He asked Bill for a contract, and Bill wouldn't budge, and kind of thought. I guess Bill thought Duggan was bluffing, and Duggan said, "He goes, look, I got to do what I got to do," and at that time, everybody was like, fuck yeah, go. Do it. Take the money.
It's worth mentioning, just to add context, while the World Wrestling Federation is the next big thing, these are the dying days of Bill Watts as a promoter, are they not? I mean, towns are down, payoffs are down. So when there's a new opportunity, doesn't take a lot of thinking here, does it?
Absolutely not, because this was also during the time that Bill was having. So Bill offers contracts to the top guys in the territory, and the contract consists of, okay, this is going to be your guarantee when you work type of situation. It might have been a yearly guarantee, but it was also during the time that Bill was into Amway.
Oh,
so Bill would say, hey, I'd really like to talk to you about your future. And I'd like to talk to you about, are you happy making the money you're making? And of course, your fucking answer is always, no, fuck, you always want to make more money. So, hey, come on by the office, and I want to talk to you. We're going to talk about your future because I see endless potential in you. So what happened is you would go in thinking, oh, fucking A, man, I'm going to get a raise. I'm going to get a contract. I'm probably going to have guaranteed money, and this is going to be great. And you say, you like working for somebody else? Wouldn't you want to be your own boss? Wouldn't you want to be in control of your own destiny and your own future? And he'd fucking give you that Amway pitch. And he would talk about, look at me. I'm a successful businessman. I've got all of this going on, but yet I'm doing Amway. You know why? Because there's no limit to what I can make with Amway. I've got all these things to deal with in the wrestling business, but with Amway, that's what's going to be my meal ticket. And if you're a mid-card guy or a lower-tiered guy, what are you going to do? You're going to write him that fucking check for $75 or whatever it is to get your initial, your starter kit of Amway.
Oh, my God.
And then you're going to order a shitload of product from him. And you're going to start trying to sell Amway.
How much Amway did Jim Ross sell back in the day?
I have no idea. I don't even know. Jim may have done it. I don't know. But here's the thing. Saying,
he would have been good at it, is my point. He's a salesman.
He's a salesman.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. He would have been great at it. But what happens is when you get into that tight knit of a group, they're all selling to themselves. There's no outside. There's no outside that they can get to, really. So I get wind of this, all right? And DiBiase had been gone for a while, and Teddy and I always traveled together and hung out. And Ted says, yeah. He goes, you talked to Bill? I said, about what? And he says, I don't know, man. Because Bill had been trying to get me to do this meeting shit. And I would conveniently find ways to get out of it.
Again, like, Amway meetings.
Amway meeting.
Yeah.
I knew it was an Amway meeting. He was about my future meeting. Well, my future I'd already discussed with Jim Ross, and I had a good idea what that was. And Jim had smartened me up to the Amway thing, and everybody had by that point. Fucking Eddie Gilbert was knee deep in the shit. And I told Teddy, I said, Teddy, it's the Amway shit. He goes, what? I said, he's going to give us the Amway pitch. That's what he wants to do. No. So anyway, Bill asks for DiBiase and I, because he knew that we ran together, to have a meeting with him on Saturday morning. We did Houston on Friday night. He was in Houston. He'd stay at the Ramada. He wanted us to come by and have a meeting with him on Saturday morning before we flew to Dallas that night to do TV. And I'm telling Ted the whole time, I'm like, dude, I don't want to do it. I've heard it. He's going to get pissed off at me. I'm going to tell him no, and he's going to be mad and all this other shit. And Ted's like, yeah, fuck that, man. Fuck that. And Teddy and I stay out all night on Friday night, and we missed the meeting. Now, we legitimately missed the meeting.
No show, no call.
We no-showed the fuck out of it.
Yeah.
Didn't call because we were passed the fuck out. We go to the airport. Going to get on our little Southwest or American flight to Dallas. And we come walking down and we're looking everywhere, just praying that Bill took the early flight like he told us he would. I think Bill was on like a 10 o'clock or something. That's the thing. We were supposed to meet him at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I think he was on a 10 o'clock and we were taking a 12 or a 1 o'clock. And we come walking down the fucking and there's somebody with a newspaper all up reading it. And I swear on fucking cue, that newspaper comes down and it's Bill. Hey kid, where were you this morning? I said, fuck Bill. Was it this morning? Type shit. And Teddy started making an excuse and all that shit, but he was pissed. He was pissed. And that was the last time that he asked for the meeting. But he got Ted. And so when he got Ted, the idea was Ted would come around and get me. And so Ted comes around to get me, and Ted is all about the fucking Amway shit. And, you know, goddamn, Bill Watts is doing it, Bruce. It's got to be good. I mean, you know, look at everything he's got, and he's doing Amway. Like, I told you that was his spiel. What are you're trying to sell ice to the Eskimo here. And it was brutal. But I never had to sit through the Amway pitch with Bill. He was pissed about it. He was not happy about it. But finally I told him, and again, he didn't try after that. But I did tell him one day, hey, Bill, about the Amway thing, man. I've done it. I'm just not my bag. And I hope you do well. I know a guy that's done that's done well. But it's not my bag, and I wish you the best. But yeah, Bill and Amway. So the territory, yeah, Duggan got out at the right time, and when Duggan left, it was rough going.
January of '87 is when I think this happens, and his first major appearance is WrestleMania 3, and at the event, he runs to ringside prior to a match between the Killer Bees and the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, and interrupts Volkov's pre-match singing of the Russian national anthem. And you come in.
My crotch. Today at the coach at the pot at the cages. But at the couch at the bait at the base.
Thank you for remembering "Eat My Crotch" belongs in that song.
I know all the words.
You show up to the company right after WrestleMania 3, still very early on in Duggan's run. Are you guys riding together at all? Like when you first
Duggan in WWE?
Yeah, like you know, you're in the same company again with one of your old buddies. Is he somebody you would have, you know, had fun on the road with, or not so much?
No, because I was only on the road for TVs when I went to WWE at the time, and that was pretty much then I was really office corporate shit.
Well, let's talk about May 26th, 1987. I guess this is maybe not just famous, but infamous, depending on how you look at it. It's the arrest of Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik. Huge deal at the time. Unlike today, wrestling is still very much protected back then, and good guys and bad guys aren't supposed to be getting together like this. The bad guys travel with bad guys, and good guys travel with good guys. And here we've got two guys who are supposed to be sworn enemies, and they're in the same car together. Meltzer would write, as most of you've probably already heard, the biggest news of the week comes from Titanland. At 2:20 p.m. this past Tuesday afternoon, May 26th, Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik were arrested on drug charges. The two were driving through Middletown, New Jersey, en route to a car that night in Asbury Park, when state troopers pulled him over as they saw Duggan drinking a bottle of beer while driving. While walking to the car, the officers caught the scent of burned marijuana cigarettes, and upon inspection found several joints in the ashtray of the car. Duggan was found with a small amount of marijuana, and 3 grams of cocaine was found in the Sheik shaving kit. Duggan was released later that day on his own recognizance, while Sheik was released after posting $5,000 bond. The two worked against each other later that night in a tag team match, which ended when Duggan hit Sheik several times with a chair, leading to the pin, and the incident would get considerable news play in several major cities, including a 2-page article in the New York Daily News, lots of play on the television news in many cities, and even a mention on the national wires and in the USA Today. The incident proved to be a major embarrassment for Titan, since Duggan and Sheik were in the midst of a heavily pushed feud and came out to the public that they were not only traveling together, but presumably doing drugs together as well. The news reports all state that Duggan and Sheik have been suspended by Titan. Actually, both were fired later the same week. From what I understand, it is highly unlikely that Sheik will ever work for Titan ever again.
Ever, never, ever.
I presume, although this hasn't been confirmed by anyone, that eventually Duggan will be brought back, although his character will certainly have to be changed. mainly because of his potential value to Titan's competition, whereas Sheik has little value to opposing offices. Equally embarrassing was the fact that in Duggan's hometown of Glen Falls, New York, they were scheduled to have a Jim Duggan Day this week. As many of you know, Duggan's father, Jim Duggan Sr., is the chief of police. Whew. This was, not too long after you get to town with the World Wrestling Federation and you're under Vince's wing now. And one of your old pals gets busted here for drugs and his dad's a police chief, which is probably something you can, feel for him about, but also too, he's quote unquote breaking kayfabe. How fucking pissed was Vince McMahon?
He was pretty pissed. And actually, I was in Stamford at the time with Paul Bosch and Paul's nephew. We were meeting, going over things, for Houston and the potential of that deal and what have you. I hadn't moved everything up there yet, but I was working technically for Vince at the time. And just so much to download on that it was Duggan. He was in line to be, be the man in so many respects. So it was disappointing to the rest of the world. The writing together thing probably was, oh my God, wrestlers ride together. It's like, come on, fucking get over it. And to those inside the wrestling world, the stalwarts, the diehards, that was taboo and just absolutely sinful. But I remember as we're getting this news, we were sitting in what was the boardroom at 1055 Summer Street. And Vince is explaining this to us, what's happened and so on and so forth. And that, he hadn't really made a decision on what he was going to do. And Paul Bosch looks at him and says, well, you need to change that ad in your magazine. And it's like, what? He goes, you need to change that ad in your magazine. And there was a big, just say no to drugs.
Oh.
Hacksaw Jim Duggan in the magazine that month. So it was, hold on one sec. Just say ho. No, I don't know. It was, but that was the one thing Paul was concerned about was false advertising. We had bigger fish to fry, and Duggan was gone. So it was a sad day, and I know that Vince was just upset that it got so much national play, and it probably got more national play because of the two guys riding together, that they picked up on that aspect of the story. And then the rest of the shit, as if, it wasn't bad enough that it was, oh, and it was two bad guys. I mean, a good guy and a bad guy. So a little tough.
Allegedly it was something that, and this might not be accurate, but allegedly he made some sort of vow Duggan will never work here again or something like that. Did you ever hear that?
No, but I could see in the heat of the moment saying something like that, but I've never, even with the worst of the worst, Vince doesn't say never, you never say never.
Let's,
except with me.
A lot of folks have, talked about this a ton, but supposedly when Duggan finds out that he's being let go, he seeks the counsel of Jake the Snake Roberts. Have you heard that story?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Well,
but I don't know the story in particular. You have to remind me.
Apparently the story is Jake says, hey man, everything's going to be okay. Just lay low for a while. And when Jake the Snake Roberts is telling you to lay low, you done fucked up, son. I wrong?
Well, it's good advice.
I would agree.
It's good advice.
Oh my gosh.
It's just, not sure that's where I would go for advice. Well, actually, I'd go to Jake for advice on some things. Yeah.
Let's get back to the story here. Meltzer would the following week report on the Duggan Sheik story. Word going around is that the decisions have been made. Both are fired. And according to my source, quote, will never work for Titan again, end quote. Apparently the wrestlers have been told that neither name should ever be mentioned on interviews or anything else. I know that immediately everyone will jump to the conclusion that Duggan will rejoin the WWF, but that doesn't seem likely at present. Maybe when his legal situation gets straightened out, and unless he runs across a judge who is able to make a reputation for himself, it's doubtful Duggan will get in too much hot water for a marijuana possession charge. Iron Sheik with a cocaine possession charge could be in deeper trouble. Remember one thing though, when it comes to wrestling, never say never. I know you disagree with a lot of what Meltzer has written over the years, but that last sentence, remember one thing though, when it comes to wrestling, never say never. You could probably,
well, even a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes.
Oh, geez.
But I think that the hardest thing for Duggan in this entire situation was letting his dad down.
Sure.
Because Jim, oh my God. And his dad was one of those, if you were ever going to have a police chief in your town, you would have wanted Mr. Duggan, Chief Duggan. He was so cool. Kind as the day is long, class, and just, he was basically Andy Griffith. And he would just take care of shit. And Jim just had so much respect and loved his dad so much. I think that the hardest thing out of all of it was he felt that he embarrassed his dad. And that was hard for him to deal with and having to, dealing with his dad. I know that hurt him. I know that was something that everything else, I think Jim being a man can sit there and say, I fucked up. I did this, I did that and accept it. But I think it kind of hurt him inside that he might think that his dad might think less of him. But, dads are dads, and our kids can fuck up, and you're always going to forgive them and love them. But that was a hard part for him.
Yeah, I can't imagine, that's got to be pretty humbling. All the articles that were written, by the way, quote the arresting officers and who say that Duggan was, quote, really polite and cooperative. So, yeah, it's a shame that all of this went down the way it did. Jim has said that he and Sheik weren't really friends. He just happened to give him a ride that day. And Jim did acknowledge he had some marijuana under the seat, and he did say they were drinking beers. So when they're pulled over, the cop tells them they're going to have to ticket him for the beer, but then he smelled the marijuana, and Jim told him he had a small amount under the seat, and they cuff him. And then they take Sheik out of the car. Of course, they find the 3 grams of cocaine. He's also arrested. They work that night, and he calls his wife and tells her about the arrest, but he doesn't think anybody knows about it. And Jim said the next call was to his dad, or from his dad rather, and his dad chewed him out, but was supportive. And then Jim calls Vince McMahon, and Vince was quiet and then says, Jim, what have you done to us? And Jim said, I'm embarrassed and I'm ashamed. Whatever you do, I understand. And Vince said, turn in your tickets and go home, meaning his airplane tickets. You're fired. And Jim's gone on record as saying that Jake unsuccessfully tries to smooth things over for him. And he winds up calling him back and saying, hey man, you're screwed. And then, his next call is to Dusty Rhodes about maybe trying to get with the NWA and set something up. But before he winds up getting a meeting with Dusty, someone from the office in the WWF calls and says, hey, just lay low for a bit and we'll find out a way to bring you back. But a lot of people, Jim included, think that he was never back on track, at least with Vince, that maybe once upon a time, Vince saw Jim Duggan and his character and size and personality as someone who could be a bigger part of the World Wrestling Federation and their expansion here. And Jim, in fact, says he thinks he was being groomed for the championship. And back then, there was only really the Intercontinental title or the world title for a single star. But as we know, Duggan never won either one of those with the company. Do you think that perhaps when this happened, Vince lost confidence in Duggan and felt like it might be risky and just didn't feel like he could trust him with that sort of push?
Well, you know what I'm going to say about the championships is that Duggan didn't need a championship. I do think that especially in the beginning for Duggan to come back, there's a bit of a trust issue. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. You've got to kind of come back, take baby steps to get where we want to go. And look, I mean, the fact that he brought him back and put him right into a program says a whole lot. So, it wasn't that bad.
Do you think, though, had this not happened, that perhaps there could have been a big singles run for Duggan working on top? Maybe not in the Hogan spot, but maybe when Hogan was away making movies, or maybe headlining the B shows, or maybe he could have felt like he could have trusted him a little more than what we actually got.
Oh, I do. I definitely believe that. I don't know what that plan may have been, but I do know that Duggan had the potential to pull that off. Yes.
It's remarkable to think about what could have been. I mean, and I know that, you know him better than anybody, but it feels like over the years, once Vince sort of makes his mind up about where you are, that's sort of where you are. And there are certainly exceptions that could be cited where he maybe changed his mind or came around. But by and large, do you think that's fair, that when Vince sort of has in his mind's eye where you are, that's where you're going to be?
But that can always be changed. And, that's up to you, the talent, and to change it and make it happen.
Well, it's just interesting to think, man, what could have been, because, we never see him work with Hogan on top. Certainly there's some tag situations here or there where Hogan would give him a little bit of a rub, but Boss Man got to work on top against Hogan, and Akeem did, and Duggan didn't get that opportunity, but maybe could have been the guy to sort of fill in. Who knows? Especially, when you look at his size, you could see how Vince would be enamored with that. Jim starts back working with King Harley Race. So, I mean, hey, when you do get to come back working with Harley Race, that's not a bad consolation prize at all, is it?
No. And it was a good story, and it was something that, put him back on the road, put him in a program, and got him going.
The 87 Slammy Awards, and what an iconic show that was. We got to cover that sometime. Duggan is presenting the nominees for best ring apparel on stage. And then there's a shoving match between him and Harley Race, who wins the award, and they wind up fighting all over the building, going backstage and in different parts of the building. And Jim says that Harley took a live chicken by the head and started hitting Jim with it. And of course, it accidentally killed the chicken. And they eventually
can't prove that.
Allegedly, they eventually reach the back of the main stage, and they're interrupting another award presentation, and Gorilla has to step in and separate them. Sort of a fun deal here. The King Harley Race. Talk to me about this.
Oh God. Well, this was my baby. It was the Slammy Awards. We had gone to Atlantic City to Caesars, and it was, like 5 days of rehearsals and laying it out, choreography for the dances and the live musical numbers and things of that nature. So this was a major deal because they fought all over the backstage of Caesars there. So it was going through the women's dressing room and the catering and the food fight. And then eventually the thing was that we had a big screen that had been up there all night. And then eventually when the time was right, they bust through the screen and they fight onto the stage. Well, we only had one screen that was going to be gone through. And we were only going to do it one time in the second show. We recorded 2 shows. It was the Saturday Night Live principle that you do 2 shows and you pick the best of the 2 shows to air. So the first show, they were not to go through the screen. And we had done all of our other shit, and these guys are covered in food and all this other crap. And I'm standing there, and it's like we'd already gone through. When we actually do record it, here's what's going to happen. And I'm standing on the opposite end. They were supposed to go in front of the screen and battle out for the first show. And then the second show, we'd actually break through. And they're on the opposite end. And I look up and they're bursting through the screen. Not in front of it, through it. And I'm like, what the fuck? And Harley said, I thought you told us to go. I said, I did, but in front of the screen. Remember, we were going to do the screen the second time because we'd done it so many times. I didn't know the first from the second to the fifth. And yeah, I got my ass chewed out pretty good on that one because everybody's out there. Thank God we had cameras rolling and everything was there. But and the talent went with it. I think it was Jesse and Monsoon out there, and they went with it and reacted beautifully to it. But yeah, that was kind of a fuck up. The Slammy Awards, so much fun.
This sort of hardcore backstage brawl, this is ahead of its time. I mean, we would see this a lot later, a generation later, but we don't see much more of Duggan and Harley. I mean, they work a handful of house shows together, but there's no like long-term plan. It sort of winds down after the Slammies. Why is that?
Well, I think that's about the time that Harley was getting ready to retire. So Harley had medical issues, that it was best for him not to be full-time anymore. And it was time for Harley to take a break, move on.
Let's talk about Royal Rumble. It feels like all is forgiven here. It's January 24th, 1988, Copps Coliseum, Hamilton, Ontario. And he's going to come in at number 13. There's only 20 entrants here, but he's going to eliminate Danny Davis, Nikolai Volkov, and lastly, his former UWF rival, the One Man Gang, to win the match. So even though there's been a lot of talk of, he didn't quite get the push that he could have before, working with Harley Race and then eventually winning the first Royal Rumble, pretty decent little push for Mr. Duggan here.
Absolutely. And, Duggan was the perfect guy at the time because not being a champion or anything like that, he was an over baby face, and it was a feel good moment, special for USA. And when you look at the possible winners of the damn thing, it was a nice little boost for Duggan.
From there, Jim finds himself in the world title tournament for WrestleMania 4. Of course, he loses to Ted DiBiase in the first round. Andre the Giant is involved in the finish of that match, and it plants the seeds of an upcoming feud between the two. Why does somebody in the back think this is a good idea? Duggan is not exactly to the Andre superstar level. And maybe in a traditional sense, you want Andre to work with a guy who can sort of fly around for him a little bit. That's not really Duggan either. Did Andre pick this, or what do you remember about pairing these two together?
Well, it was shit. I think it's a great idea because it's doing more for Hacksaw Duggan at this point. Andre had been through Hogan, and now it was an opportunity for Andre to make someone else. And that's how this program was looked at, by someone being able to compete with the Giant and stand up to him was a major deal. So Duggan going in with the Giant, the whole thing was designed to get Hacksaw Jim Duggan over. And you want to go out there and be brutalized by Andre every night and stand there. And Andre like Duggan. So Andre was happy to go out and work with Duggan and make him look good and be the guy to slay the beasts.
It's worth mentioning they did work together during Jim's brief run in Hawaii back when Duggan was wrestling as the Convict. And Jim says they got along great, and he felt like Andre liked working him. Eventually, Jim's going to come down to the ring during one of Andre's matches and challenge him. Andre winds up attacking Jim, but Jim ends up knocking Andre out with the 2x4. And Andre would later interfere in Jim's match against Hercules on Saturday night's main event, number 16. I got to mention, this is a pretty cool deal. We've never really seen Andre, quote unquote, knocked out cold like this. So Andre clearly liked Jim, or that would not have been a spot he would have done, right?
Absolutely. And Andre had choked Duggan so hard. I remember Duggan busting his mouth wide open and just spitting up all kinds of blood and shit. But it was worth it in the end. And there's a nice little Easter egg in there somewhere. I haven't seen it in years. I just remember it because I was scared for my life. We had gone down when Andre was coming to, and to get Andre from, and I was a suit to go down and get involved in the melee, and Andre about killed me. Just missed with a kick that probably would have sent me into the 8th row. But I was terrified.
Bruce, this feud sort of gets blown off without there being a pay-per-view singles match. That would have been unheard of in a more modern era. But back then, you weren't always driving for pay-per-view, but you would give them a tease of some sort of big interaction like this on TV. But the real money was in the house show business, right?
Absolutely. That's what you were working for. You know, the big pay-per-views were great, and we did that, but it was all about the live events.
And we certainly got to see our fair share of that. Once that feud starts to wind down, Jim's in a very brief feud with Dino Bravo. And at the Survivor Series in '88, Jim would team with Jake Roberts, Ken Patera, Scott Casey, and Tito Santana to face Andre the Giant, Dino Bravo, Harley Race, Mr. Perfect, and Rick Rude. Holy shit, what a heel team that is. Jim doesn't eliminate anyone and finds himself disqualified when he hits Bravo with the 2x4. At the Royal Rumble '89, Jim would team with the Hart Foundation to defeat Bravo and the Fabulous Rougeaus in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Dino coming up twice here. I got to mention, this past week, we saw the Dark Side of the Ring documentary about Dino Bravo. Did you have a chance to see that?
Yeah, I did. I couldn't watch the whole thing because I don't like reading my programming. So it was a little difficult to follow. It was a little bit too much French Canadian for me. And so I can't say that I saw the whole thing. It was a little difficult to watch.
Talk to me about Dino Bravo, though. It's been one of the more famous stories in wrestling, his demise. What's the theory you heard that you sort of grew up believing these last 20 or 30 years?
You know, I don't know that. I mean, other than what obviously took place and that he was essentially assassinated in his own home. So, you know, it tells you a couple things, that he probably knew whoever did it and that it was personal. So I don't know, because I wasn't around Dino a lot. Dino wasn't somebody that I went and hung out with. Very nice man, but you know, we all heard what everybody else heard, that he was involved with the wrong people, and something bad must have happened for him to be basically assassinated in his own home. It was definitely a shock.
Yeah, to say the least. Jim would then briefly be in a feud with Bad News Brown, and they would wrestle at WrestleMania 5, and the match ends in a double DQ. Bad News Brown is somebody we don't talk about a ton here on the show. How legit was Bad News Brown, the former Bad News Allen?
Buck, he was super legit. He was on the judo team in the Olympics, and Alan Quage was his name, and he was about as tough come. I saw him go after a guy who went in and into his bag and took out a knife that was, you know, like the Arabian movies, not like the total sword, but kind of the mid-sized swords.
Yeah.
You see, I swear the guy had a knife that big and this guy's got the knife trying to wield it at Allen, and Allen's just walking right towards him, ain't backing up a bit. And thank God people got there in time before we found out it was going to happen, but there was absolutely zero backup in Bad News Allen in real life.
May 13th, 1989, Jim would beat King Haku to become the new king of the WWF. So, he wins the 88 Royal Rumble, and then in 89 beats Haku to become the new king. What'd you think of, King Duggan? I guess this is like an unofficial championship of sorts. First Harley Race had it, then Haku. Now Haku loses it here to Duggan. We know eventually it's going to become the Macho King. Talk to me about this early incarnation of the King here.
It was an evolution of the gimmick, and it was an evolution of Hacksaw Jim Duggan to, okay, he's a tough guy, he does all of these things, and just let's put this title on him, for lack of a better term, for a while, and become King Duggan. And he was a benevolent king. Ho!
A benevolent king. A few weeks later on Saturday night's main event, King Duggan gets a shot at the Intercontinental title against Rick Rude. Jim wins by countout, so the title doesn't change. So essentially Rude retains. At SummerSlam though, this is one of the more memorable moments for Duggan on pay-per-view here. He's going to team up with Demolition, and he wears a big Demolition mask to the ring. But the fun thing is he's also got his face painted, and he's even got his 2x4 decorated. He was a walking, talking gimmick in this match, was he not?
Absolutely. Thank God. To say the least.
They beat the massive team of Andre the Giant, Big Boss Man, and Akeem. There's some beef on that side of the ring, my friends. Jim would hit Akeem with a 2x4, and then Smash would pin him. In September of that
How'd that
year,
2x4 feel?
Probably pretty bad.
Well, anyway.
I'll ask Dad next time I see him.
The Alabama Dream.
In September, Jim loses the King of the Ring title, or the King of the WWF rather, to Randy Savage, and Randy becomes the King, of course. Sensational Sherry becomes Queen Sherry. I always loved Macho King. Survivor Series 1990, they captain teams against each other. Jim's team is going to consist of the 4x4s. That's himself, Bret Hart, Ronnie Garvin, and Hercules, taking on Savage's King's Court, which is, of course, Randy and Greg Valentine, Dino Bravo, and Earthquake. In the match, Jim would pin Greg Valentine, but then he's counted out when he starts to chase Sherry outside of the ring. Randy, Bravo, and Earthquake wind up being the sole survivors of the match. And then on Saturday night's main event, the 25th edition of January 1990, Randy would pin Duggan, and this essentially ends their feud. Normally the good guy comes out on top, but here, it feels like, we're certainly going to favor Savage more than Duggan. Savage gets the win.
It's appropriate.
They briefly rekindle the feud with Dino Bravo, which culminates between, the two in a match at WrestleMania 6. Duggan wins there. And then Jim forms a team with a newly turned babyface, Nikolai Volkov, and they beat the Orient Express at SummerSlam 90. What's the thinking here? Nikolai is the perennial heel, and now he's going to have a change of heart. Talk to me about this.
Well, Nicky was on the backside of his career, and I think that people during this time, we weren't in the Cold War anymore, and it's time for Nicky to see the light of day. And he understood how America had helped him and how he had the freedom that he couldn't enjoy in Russia. And you got a fresh, new, nice character babyface in Nikolai Volkov. And what better person to essentially crown him and deem him an American than the All-American Hacksaw Jim Duggan? Makes perfect sense to me.
Let's keep it rolling here. The team doesn't last very long. Jim quickly returns to singles competition. He starts a very brief feud with the world champion Sergeant Slaughter, and he even gets a world title match against Sarge in the February 1st edition of Main Event. Of course, Jim wins by DQ, which means Sarge would retain the title. I guess this makes sense. I mean, if you're looking for, Slaughter to get more heat as an Iraqi sympathizer. You let him beat up the All-American flag waving stars and bars, or stars and stripes rather, Jim Duggan, right?
Absolutely. Before that damn All-American Hulk Hogan can get to him.
Let's keep it rolling here and talk about what's next, because there is, Slaughter's going to lose the belt to WrestleMania, or to Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 7, but then he turns babyface. Of course, he sees the light, and now he's an American again, and he'll start teaming with Jim Duggan quite a bit. At the 90 Survivor Series, we see Jim Duggan, Sergeant Slaughter, Kerry Von Erich, and Tito Santana. What a team that is. Taking on Colonel Mustafa, Hercules, Skinner, and the Berserker. Maybe not so much on the other side. Duggan winds up pinning Berserker to win the match and make his entire team the survivors of the match. And Jim has said somewhere in here there were plans for him and Sarge to get a tag title run, but it quickly winds up being changed, and the Legion of Doom get the title push. Do you think if LOD hadn't switched teams that maybe Jim and Sarge could have had a run here as tag champs?
Possible, but I can't say that I ever heard those plans definitively.
WrestleMania 8 feels like a fever dream. We've got Jim teaming with Sergeant Slaughter, Big Boss Man, and Virgil to take on the Nasty Boys, the Mountie, and the Repo Man. And not long.
Well, I wasn't there.
Not long after that, Sarge pretty much retires from wrestling, and now Jim is back to being a singles wrestler. And for the rest of 92, he's mostly working undercards, but not really involved in any angles, not receiving much of a push at all. His next big push would come in 1993 when he starts a feud with Yokozuna, or as Jim referred to him, Yokozuna. Yoko's still new to the company, being groomed to be the new top heel. And I guess if we're going to push that he's this big, mean, nasty foreign heel from Japan, it makes sense to put him against Mr. America himself, the flag bearer, just like we had for Sergeant Slaughter. They wound up having a match, and it was promoted by claiming that no one had knocked Yokozuna down, even though Yoko had fallen off his feet shortly before at the 93 Royal Rumble match. And the steps of the match
But no one knocked him down in one-on-one competition.
Okay.
And 42 people in the ring knocking a guy down, that doesn't count.
The steps are, if Duggan were to knock Yoko off his feet, Duggan wins. This is the February 6th edition of Superstars, and Duggan wins after knocking Yoko down completely, but then he's attacked after the match, receives 4 bonsai drops, and he's put on the shelf for 4 months. And Jim has said that Yoko just missed on the drop and broke 2 of his ribs. Says it wasn't Yoko's fault. It was just one of those things that happened. Do you remember Duggan being legitimately injured by one of the squashes?
Yeah, I do. It was Yoko kind of getting his timing down on that. And the sad thing is out of anybody that was ever injured by Yoko, that it was Hacksaw there. And that was kind of a bummer.
It really is. It makes sense for them to be together. I assume, just because of the American piece. When Jim comes back, he's put into a very brief angle where he's working with the Intercontinental Champion, Shawn Michaels. Certainly an interesting pairing, a big styles clash between the two. But Shawn was known for being able to get a good match out of pretty much anybody. What can you tell us about this pairing? It does feel, a little different, Duggan and Shawn.
It's definitely off, and probably more than anything, it was, as much I hate to say it, a match for match sake, and looking at Shawn to go out there and have that great match, and you get to see what Duggan can do. And I think both delivered on their part more than anything.
They had a match on the May 3rd Raw for the title, which Jim wins by count out when Shawn runs through the crowd. And the following week on Raw, they have a rematch, but this time it's to prevent Shawn from running through the crowd again. They do a lumberjack match. And for those who don't know, because we don't see these all the time, so there's a ton of wrestlers surrounding the ring. And so if one of the participants of the match leaves the ring, the wrestlers on the outside, or lumberjacks as they're called in this situation, throw the guys back in the ring. Well, Shawn winds up winning this by DQ, and that's pretty much the end of the feud. And then from there, Jim's in the King of the Ring tournament, the very first one on pay-per-view in June of 93. And he defeats Papa Shango to qualify for the tournament. But at the pay-per-view, he's pinned by Bam Bam Bigelow and then eliminated. And after this, he would be programmed with the world champion Yokozuna on house shows throughout the summer. But of course, Yoko wins all of those and retains. But he winds up leaving the company not too terribly long after this. And I guess it's worth mentioning that Hulk Hogan is finishing up here at King of the Ring, and Jim Duggan is one of his pals. So when Hogan winds up working with WCW, ultimately Duggan is in tow, and he's going to wind up working for WCW. And Jim says during this time in the WWF, if he didn't work, he didn't get paid, and WCW offered him a guaranteed contract, so he took it. And this is the time when a lot of guys are sort of jumping ship, you know, not just Hulk Hogan, but eventually Macho Man and the Honky Tonk Man and the Big Boss Man and Mean Gene and Bobby Heenan. And we see so many of these iconic WWF characters jump ship to WCW. How does Vince take it when it sort of comes to an end here for Jim Duggan and the World Wrestling Federation?
You know, yeah, it's kind of like we took everybody else. It was hard in the beginning, but the reality of the situation was that this was during the time that Turner was able to offer guys these contracts where they didn't work, they still got paid. And with us, you got paid when you worked. So it was the beginning of the battle, so to speak. And Duggan was one. I know that was definitely a selling point for Hulk, but that, hey guys, you're going to get a guaranteed contract. You're going to know what you're going to make. The only difference is that what they could make was capped per their contract, and ours, you made what you made, no matter what it was. So it was just a difference in philosophy, and times were changing. So I don't think anybody blames Duggan for going. He did what he needed to do for his family.
As we mentioned, he goes to WCW with all of his old pals. He winds up becoming the United States champion in 1994, beating some guy named Stunning Steve Austin. He loses it to Vader at Starrcade 94. Did you keep up with Duggan at all during his WCW years, or is this one of those deals where he's a work friend, but when y'all don't work together, you just sort of lose touch?
We did kind of lose touch, but every once in a while I would see Duggan, and always friendly. And I've always considered Duggan a friend. And no matter where you work, your personal feelings, and you've got to, you got to remember that business is business and personal is personal. And I've always had a good relationship with Jim, no matter where he's been. And I would see him from time to time when he was at WCW. And to me, he's just Jim Duggan.
September 7th, 1998, Duggan announces live on WCW Saturday Night that he's been diagnosed with kidney cancer. He undergoes successful surgery, and because the cancer was detected very early, no chemotherapy was needed, but he doesn't wrestle again until April of 99. He makes his WWE return 12 years after he originally left in 2005. He appears on the Raw Homecoming show on October 3rd. He and other legends would attack Rob Conway after Conway came to the ring and insulted him. He's also one of the legends available for fans to select him to team with Eugene in a match at Taboo Tuesday to face the team of Conway and Tyson Tomko. Jimmy Snuka winds up winning the vote. He returns to the WWE after the Royal Rumble with a message from John Cena to Lita after Edge had lost the title, saying, "Ho!" And Duggan and Edge then start a short feud, which culminates with a match on Raw, which of course Edge wins. And then he becomes a mentor and tutor for Eugene and even forms a brief tag team. He starts working on Heat, makes a few appearances with Eugene and the Highlanders. And then on the November 6th Raw, Duggan and Eugene would face the Spirit Squad in a match, with the stipulation being the losing team would disband and never team up again. Of course, Jim takes the pin, and then Eugene snaps and attacks Duggan, and they start a brief feud against each other, which of course Eugene wins. And then Jim leaves for a bit. Sort of a fun who to funk it, one last hurrah for Jim Duggan here. How did this come to be?
It just, again, time and Duggan being available. And from time to time, Jim would reach out and say, "Hey, I'm out here. And Brian Gewirtz, I believe it was Brian who actually came up with the suggestion to use Duggan. And it's nice to have that nostalgia and to be able to bring a character like that, because that character, I think you could bring him out today and the audience would go crazy. So it was just a long-lasting, enduring character that was a lot of fun to write for.
Jim leaves for a while, comes back around New Year's resolution 2007. He's going to team with Super Crazy in a tag team turmoil match to determine the number one contenders. Of course, they lose. The January 15th Raw, he's dragged out by Rated RKO and beaten up because they didn't want Jim teaming with Shawn Michaels in an upcoming handicap match they had against Shawn. On March 5th, Jim would face Chris Masters in a Master Lock challenge. Of course, he's unable to break the hold. Over the next few months, Jim actually wrestles a few matches on Heat. And when he returns to Raw in July, he's teaming up with the Sandman to feud with William Regal and Carlito. Short-lived though. And then Duggan finds himself working some matches on Heat. And on the August 6th edition, he winds up being in a WWE dating game, a parody of the TV show, of course. And Duggan loses when Maria chooses Ron Simmons. On the December 31st Raw, he loses a Royal Rumble qualifying match to Umaga. And on the March 17th 08 Raw, he's in a 17-on-2 handicap match. That's 17-on-2. It's 17 members of the Raw roster against John Cena and Randy Orton. After Cody Rhodes was eliminated, all the remaining Raw wrestlers attacked Cena and Orton, resulting in a DQ. And then Jim is a part of a 24-man battle royal held right before WrestleMania 24 aired to determine the number one contendership for the ECW championship. Of course, that match is won by Kane. In the summer of 08, he starts a brief feud with Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase after Rhodes and DiBiase tried to convince Duggan to retire and let the young talent run the show. Soon after, Duggan would come out and announce that he would take Rhodes and DiBiase's advice and retire, but Jerry Lawler stops him by convincing him to stay. And that leads to a match on the August 25th Raw. Of course, Duggan and Lawler lose. On the October 20th Raw, Duggan would confront Santino and Beth Phoenix during one of Morella's promos about his three possible opponents at Cyber Sunday, which is Roddy Piper, Goldust, and Honky Tonk Man. Upset at being interrupted, Morella took off all his clothes, getting ready to fight Duggan. And then instead, Morella instructed Phoenix to throw clothes in Duggan's face, which distracts him. He smashes a guitar over Duggan's head. Jim pops up very briefly on the 800th episode of Raw in November during a Kung Fu Naki in-ring dance segment. This has Brian written all over it. It's like, hey,
everybody was Kung Fu Naki.
Let's fast forward.
Indeed.
The April 2nd, 2011 is when Jim is inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, of course, by his old pal, Ted DiBiase. You're not with the company at the time, but it's a special moment when somebody gets inducted into the Hall of Fame, and who better than his old pal, Ted DiBiase, who he just drew tons of money with in Mid-South, and really his whole journey in professional wrestling. DiBiase was somehow a big part of it. Probably a great honor to be honored in that way and have one of your old pals do you the honors.
Absolutely. And, you know, it was during that time, well, actually a little bit after that Jim had come down, and I was in TNA at that time, and he was just looking for anything to do. And unfortunately we didn't have anything at the time, but it was, I remember feeling so bad because I had seen him that day, and he was sitting in the stands and hanging out, and I didn't know that he was waiting to talk to me. And I felt absolutely fucking horrible because Hogan finally came over and told me and says, hey, he goes, did you talk to Duggan? I said, yeah. I said, hello. It was great to see him. He says, yeah, he's here to talk to you. And Jim, just being the consummate gentleman more than anything, didn't want to interrupt me. And I was like, fuck, he could interrupt me anytime. That was insane. But over the years, when I would go to the autograph signings and things like that, if Hacksaw Jim Duggan was there, one way or another, we always got together. And his wife, Deborah, just sweetest woman. You know, God makes them and pairs them. And those two are just as much in love with each other today, got beautiful children, as they were when they met. I remember when they met. Just great people. But Duggan is one of those, and you know me at those. I try and hide a lot of times.
Yeah.
But if Duggan's there, I go find Duggan. And if I don't find him, Deborah and him usually find me. So Duggan's got a very, very special place in my heart, and I think he's one of the best and greatest that's ever been.
He pops up a few more times in 2012, and he actually picks up a win by DQ over Jack Swagger on the March 4th, 2013 Raw. I guess that's like a Raw Rewind or Raw Reunion, one of those throwback Raws. And then in 2014, I think a lot of fans got to meet sort of the man behind the character when the WWE Network aired Legends House. What'd you think of Jim on that show?
Well, again, you got two of my favorite people that became friends during that, which was Duggan and Roddy Piper. And when they got out of it, Roddy and I were talking, and he says, he goes, I never really knew Duggan. He's a guy, he was there sometimes when I was there, then he wasn't, we passed. And he goes, well, I got to know this guy in the house. What a fucking good guy. Why didn't you tell me? Like, I don't know. But they became good friends in that damn house. And I was shocked that they hadn't hung out before, because very similar personalities and but yet different all at the same time.
What do you think his legacy is going to be in professional wrestling?
Oh, I think that, Duggan's going to be that 2x4 wheeling All-American. And for me, I just think Jim's going to go down as an All-American hero in the wrestling business, because that's who he was and that's who he is in real life.
Let's do some questions. We went to Twitter at Prichard Show. So we've got an upcoming Something to Wrestle. We're going to discuss the one and only Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Have a question, drop them in the replies here. We've got some fun stuff coming your way, including next week. And I'm really excited about this. Backlash 05. And sometime by the end of the month, in these last few days, we're going to revisit a Saturday night's main event from April of 1990 that I just watched that, man, I'm fired up for. And then on May 8th, we'll be back with Tito Santana. But first, let's get through some of these Hacksaw Jim Duggan questions. We'll do them rapid fire. Bruce, are you ready?
I am ready.
Levi Betts wants to know, how many hoes did Hacksaw use during his time in the WWE?
Ho!
Is there a proper number of O's in ho? I know that sounds funny, but I think Ric Flair has decided there are 5 O's in woo. So the official woo has 5 O's. How many O's are in the official hose?
4, because if it were 5, then it would be hoo.
Okay.
Or whoo.
Michael Eldridge wants to know, where did Hacksaw get his 2x4s?
2x4s are us. It's right next to Lumber BS and shit.
Was there any consideration of turning Hacksaw heel and being sort of anti-patriotic like Sergeant Slaughter?
I don't think that, you know what? I mean, kind of like Cena and Hogan and people like that. Hogan did it and did it very successfully, obviously. I don't know if Duggan, they would have accepted him as a heel, because the human being is just so nice.
No, I see that. Talk to me a little bit about, and I don't think we've ever really broke this down, but this 80s group of legends that Vince makes larger than life stars, a lot of them came from Bill Watts. And so they take a guy with pull on boots and karate pants and put him in neon tights and lace up snakeskin boots and give him a snake in the bag to carry to the ring. And they take the $1 Million Man, or they take Ted DiBiase and slap a sequin suit on him and give him maybe one of the more prolific gimmicks of the 80s. We're going to take another member of the Rat Pack here, and we're going to paint him up like a clown. Matt Bourne is going to become Doink. Hacksaw Jim Duggan just gets tough guy and USA and ho and a 2x4. He sort of won in that deal, did he not?
I think they all won, frankly. Good Lord. $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase walking around with limitless cash and traveling first class and limos everywhere. And Matt Bourne is the Doink gimmick was off the chart. And Duggan being Duggan. To me, every one of them won.
I'm just saying it's weird that, you know, a guy like Coco Ware crushing in Texas, or not Texas, but Tennessee, and people such a fan of his work. We're going to spice him up, make him more colorful, give him a bird. And everybody sort of had a gimmick, and it was, maybe not occupational gimmicks like we would get to several years later, but they needed something that made their character stand out. Talk to me about how this came together for Hacksaw, where it's just blue tights, chant USA, yell ho, and carry this board.
Because that's all you needed with him. And his personality as a human being and what he did in the ring and his promos were pure blue collar, working class Americana. And that's who Jim Duggan was. So Hacksaw Jim Duggan was just that turned up. There wasn't a lot of difference in it. Didn't need to be.
Do you know where the 2x4 comes from? I mean, I know that we know where it came from beforehand, but Vince let him keep it going. Like when he's in the territory system, he would carry a 2x4 or calls himself Hacksaw. Sometimes though, when Vince gets you, he wants you to do something totally different. Why was Vince okay with the 2x4? Do you think?
I don't think it needed to be tweaked. Some didn't get tweaked. Some did, some didn't.
What about Ho and Tough Guy and all the other identifiable mannerisms? Is this anything from creative services, or is this all just Duggan trying to come up with something and, hey, we're going to stick with this?
You know, again, don't fix what's not broken. And in that regard, Duggan did all of that. And it was so straightforward that in that time, it all worked. And there were little tweaks to it, but not a lot.
It feels like something right out of Watts' territory for him to get in the corner and do the whole 3-point stance thing. What did Vince think of that?
Again, that was one of his signatures, but that was Duggan long before he got to Watts.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying it became something that was a big part, but I bring that up because I feel like sometimes over the years, whenever Jim Ross would talk about a guy's amateur background or where he played football, it feels like sometimes that annoyed Vince. So I wondered if him breaking out a 3-point stance would have been something that he would have said, Jim, it's not football. Don't do that shit again.
Well, no, it's a fine tackle. And that's something that Jim Duggan did. I think that the annoyance, as you say, or the disconnect is what I say, is when you have a character that you're trying to sell the attributes of the character, and being a 4-time All-American or playing at East Tennessee Junior College, 2.5 semesters of basketball, doesn't fit. And that's where the disconnect comes. And sometimes it's, I don't give a fuck that Undertaker played basketball in high school and college. I love The Undertaker. I want to be about the Undertaker character. So we're telling stories here, and it's fictional anyway. Sometimes, yes, there's reality to it. You can expound on real credentials when it fits. Sometimes it just doesn't fit. Sometimes it does.
Lenny Bakken writes, Duggan seems to have such a funny, happy-go-lucky type of guy. Was this always the case behind the scenes? Was he as well liked by everyone, or did he have detractors?
Why does Link Bakken always get asked questions?
Because you give him all of your money.
Good point. Duggan was well liked in and out of the ring without a doubt. And that's who, in many respects, especially in later years, the guy that you saw on camera and especially the guy you saw in the house, that's Duggan.
3 blind mice want to know, did Bruce ever have the pleasure of indulging in the wacky tobacco with Jim Duggan?
His car stayed at my house. We were friends. There might have been a bong that remained in the center seat of his vehicle from time to time. What the hell do you think?
Well, I think the question is sort of post arrest. Does Duggan swear off of it and he wants to keep his nose clean, pardon the pun, as much as possible? Or did he chalk a lot of that up to, I'm just not riding with fucking Cheek anymore?
I think he was very careful after that.
Yeah. Adam wants to know, was there any heat with Andre after he headbutted him in the face and busted his lip open?
No, God, no. Shit happens.
You know, nearly every other question is about whether or not he sort of torpedoed his own career with this Sheik arrest. And we'll never really know, but in a different alternate universe, if that arrest never happens, you think Duggan could have become WWF World Champion at some point? I mean, did Vince see him as that level top babyface on the lunchbox, on the cartoons type of character?
Well, definitely. I don't know if champion, but yes, definitely is a top attraction without a doubt, hands down. And I think that Duggan, again, it speaks to the human being that he is, was able to come back from that and continue to have a great career. So yes, it sidelined him for a while, but he was able to pick it up and continue on.
James Miranda writes, Duggan was advertised for the 93 Royal Rumble, but didn't participate. Does Bruce remember why?
I have no idea.
Well, let's wrap this one up. Anything else you want to mention about, Jim Duggan, the man, the character, the performer?
I love the man. I love the character. And he was an awful lot of fun to hang out with and be around for all those years. Happy and proud to call him a friend. But this was fun because it was all good stuff, in my opinion. Yes, we covered some bad stuff in his career, but I think he came out on the other side of it doing just fine, and always look forward to seeing him.
Did you see his little stint in WCW where he joined Team Canada? What'd you think of that?
God, I have absolutely no idea.
Well, we hope you have an idea that you need to tune in next week to Something to Wrestle when we dig deep.
Who booked that shit?
Backlash 2005. But then the following week, man, we're going to have some fun. I'm really excited about the month of May. It's Tito Santana, a Frankie Kazarian special. But at some point on adfreeshows.com, we're going to sit down and watch an old episode of Saturday Night's Main Event. Sorry for the delay this week, but hopefully you guys enjoyed what we were able to drop on you this past Friday. If you haven't already, go check it out. Bruce and I watched the Undertaker streak come to an end at WrestleMania 30. And I listened to it back, man. We were having fun with that. It was a good show, and I hope you guys dug it. He is at Bruce Prichard. I am at Hey, it's Conrad, and we are out of time. We'll see you next week right here on Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard.
And I thank everybody for being patient during these crazy times and us being able to do this on a Sunday. And with that, I say, Shakaka. Maybe Pasha Villa could get some Grubhub and sent over to the casa.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.